It was 11 at night, pouring rain, and a single mother driving a minivan with 230,000 miles on it spotted something that made her pull over: a boy, 9 years old. Standing alone at a bus stop with no umbrella, no phone, no adult in sight. Just a backpack and a pair of sneakers that cost more than her rent. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from. She just knew a child shouldn't be standing in the dark alone, so she opened the door. That one decision would put her face on every news channel in America, because the boy she just picked up had a father worth $4.7 billion, and that father believed someone had taken his son. Betty had been awake for 17 hours straight. Her back ached from standing over a prep station at Rosario's, the Italian place on Fulton where she worked 4 nights a week, chopping onions, peeling garlic, and scrubbing sheet pans that never seemed to come clean. Her fingers still smelled like fryer grease. Her hair pulled back in a tired bun carried the ghost of every dish that had come out of that kitchen tonight. It was 11:13. She knew because the clock on the dashboard was the one thing in her minivan that still worked perfectly. The rain had started around 9 and hadn't let up since. Heavy, angry rain. The kind that turns New York streets into shallow rivers and makes the potholes invisible until you hit one and feel it in your teeth. Betty's windshield wipers were a problem. The left one worked fine. The right one dragged across the glass like a broken arm, leaving a wide smear that turned the world outside into a blur. She'd been meaning to replace it for 3 months. 3 months of meaning to, and never having the $40 to spare. She was driving the route she always drove. Grand to Atlantic to Fulton to home. 14 minutes if the lights cooperated. Jalen would be asleep on the couch by now. Mrs. Thelma from next door would be watching her game shows, with the volume low, waiting for Betty to walk through the door so she could go home to her own apartment. Betty was thinking about sleep, about kicking off her shoes, about the 6 hours between now and when her alarm would drag her back into the world for her morning job at the school. Then she saw him. At first, just a shape. A small, dark outline standing under the bus stop shelter on the corner of Atlantic and Nostrand. Not sitting, standing, arms wrapped around himself, head down. Betty's foot eased off the gas. Her brain said, "Keep driving." Her brain said, "You are tired, and your son is waiting, and this is not your problem, and you do not have time for whatever this is." She passed the bus stop, watched the shape shrink in her rearview mirror, and then her brain stopped talking. Because something else took over. Something deeper than logic, deeper than exhaustion, deeper than the reasonable voice that told her to mind her own business. It was the voice of her mother. The voice that had been gone for 3 years but still lived in Betty's chest like a second heartbeat. You do not walk past a child alone in the dark. Not ever. Not for any reason. Betty hit the brakes, checked her mirror, pulled a U-turn that would have gotten her a ticket if any cop had been watching. She rolled up to the bus stop and lowered her passenger window. The rain blew in sideways, spotting the seat. She didn't care. He was smaller than she'd thought. 9, maybe 10, thin, wearing a jacket that looked expensive, even soaking wet. Dark blue. Some kind of technical fabric, the kind with a brand name stitched small on the chest. His backpack hung heavy on his shoulders. His face was turned away. Hey, sweetheart. You okay? Nothing. No movement. No eye contact. Are you lost? Do you need help? The boy turned his head slightly, just enough for Betty to see his eyes. Big, red-rimmed, the look of someone who had been crying for a long time and had run out of tears, but not out of pain. "I am fine," he said. His voice was small and tight and shaking. Betty had worked with children for 6 years at Jefferson Elementary. She knew what fine looked like, and this was not it. "Baby, it is 11 at night, and you are standing in the rain by yourself. That is not fine. Where are your parents?" Silence. "Is there someone I can call for you?" He shook his head. Quick. Almost panicked. Betty looked at his shoes. Brand new. White. Some kind of limited edition that Jalen had pointed out in a store window once and said, "Mama, those cost $400. Who pays $400 for shoes?" This boy was wearing them, in the rain, with no umbrella and no adult and no plan. He was not a street kid. He was not from this neighborhood. He was not from anywhere near this neighborhood. Everything about him, the jacket, the shoes, the smartwatch on his wrist, the haircut that probably cost more than Betty's electric bill, everything screamed money. Serious money. But his eyes screamed something else entirely. "Listen," Betty said, "I am not going to force you into this car, but I am a mother, and I am not driving away and leaving you out here. So you can stand in the rain or you can get in, and I will take you somewhere warm, and we will figure this out together. Your choice." The boy looked at the minivan, at the dent in the side door, at the cracked taillight held together with red tape, at Betty, still in her work clothes, smelling like garlic and dish soap, with tired eyes and a face that held no judgment, only concern. He opened the door and climbed in. He sat in the back seat, pulled the door shut behind him, held his backpack against his chest like it contained everything he owned in the world. And he didn't say a single word. Betty pulled away from the curb and headed home. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know where he came from. She didn't know that within 12 hours this boy's face would be on the news, that a billionaire would be tearing the city apart looking for him, and that Betty herself would become the prime suspect in what the media would call a kidnapping. All she knew right now was that a child had been alone in the dark, and she had stopped. That was enough. That had to be enough. To understand why Betty stopped that night, you need to understand what kind of woman she was. Not the kind the world writes stories about. Not the kind who shows up in headlines or wins awards or gets invited to speak at conferences. The kind who disappears into the background of other people's lives. The kind who holds things together so quietly that nobody notices she is doing it until she stops. Betty Dawson was 34 years old. Single mother to one boy, Jalen, 7 years old, with his father's smile and his mother's stubbornness. She had been raising him alone since he was 2. That was when Terrence left, not in some dramatic way. No fight, no note, no grand exit. He just stopped coming home. One night turned into 2. 2 turned into a week turned into a month, and then the month turned into 5 years of nothing. No calls, no money, no explanation. Just silence where a father used to be. Betty worked 2 jobs. During the day, she was a teacher's aide at Jefferson Elementary, a public school in Bed-Stuy, where the textbooks were 10 years old and the heating broke every February. She helped kids with reading, sat with the ones who couldn't focus, held the hands of first graders who cried at drop-off because their parents were already gone before the bell rang. She made $812 every 2 weeks after taxes. At night, 4 days a week, she worked prep in the kitchen at Rosario's, chopping, peeling, cleaning, lifting, scrubbing. Her hands were rough from it. The skin across her knuckles stayed dry no matter how much lotion she used. She made another $600 a month from the restaurant, sometimes less if they cut her hours. Between the 2 jobs, she earned just enough to keep the apartment, keep the lights on, keep food in the refrigerator, and keep Jalen in clothes that fit. There was never anything left over, not for savings, not for emergencies, not for the dentist, not for the mechanic. The minivan was a 2007 Honda Odyssey with 230,000 miles on it. She had bought it for $1,100 cash from a man in New Jersey who told her it ran good and forgot to mention that the transmission shuddered above 50 miles an hour. The sliding door on the right side had to be pulled open by hand. The air conditioning only worked on the driver's side. The check engine light had been on so long that Betty had stopped seeing it. But that van was her lifeline. It took Jalen to school. It got her to both jobs. It carried groceries. It served as a quiet place to cry on the nights when everything felt impossible and she needed 2 minutes alone before walking into the apartment with a smile. She listened to gospel music in that van, hummed along to songs her mother used to sing, talked to God in that van when there was nobody else to talk to. Jalen was everything. Not in the way people say it to be poetic, in the literal way. He was the reason she got out of bed at 5:30 every morning. The reason she worked 2 jobs instead of 1. The reason she kept that van running with duct tape and prayers instead of letting it die. He was a good kid, quiet, thoughtful for his age. The kind of boy who would draw a picture for his teacher when she seemed sad, who shared his lunch with classmates, who forgot theirs, who told his mother she looked pretty even when she hadn't slept in 2 days and had bags under her eyes deep enough to carry groceries in. Betty's mother, Lorraine Dawson, had raised Betty the same way Betty was raising Jalen, alone, working hard, showing up every single day no matter what. Lorraine had been a home health aide for 22 years. She cleaned houses, cooked meals, bathed elderly patients, and never once complained about the work. She told Betty once, "The day you start feeling sorry for yourself is the day you stop moving forward, and I did not raise you to stand still." Lorraine died 3 years ago. Stroke. Quick. No warning. Betty got the call at work and drove to the hospital and sat in the waiting room for 4 hours before a doctor told her what she already knew. Her mother was gone. The thing Lorraine left behind was not money. She had none. It was not property or jewelry or a savings account. What Lorraine left behind was a way of seeing the world, a set of rules that lived inside Betty like bones. You work hard. You do not complain. You raise your children right. And you do not walk past a child alone in the dark. Not ever. Not for any reason. That was the rule that made Betty turn her van around on a rainy night in November. That was the rule that put her on a collision course with a world she never asked to enter. The drive from the bus stop to Betty's apartment was 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, the boy in her back seat said almost nothing. Betty did not push. She had learned from years of working with children that silence is not emptiness. Sometimes silence is a wall a kid builds to keep the world out. And you do not break down a wall by yelling through it. You sit next to it. You wait. You let them know the door is open whenever they are ready. She turned the radio on low. A gospel station, soft music, the kind that fills a silence without crowding it. She adjusted the rearview mirror just enough to see him. He was sitting with his back straight, arms wrapped around his backpack, staring out the window at the rain. His face reflected in the glass, ghostly and pale. "Is there anyone you want me to call?" "A parent. A family member." He shook his head. "Are you hungry?" No answer. But Betty heard it, a low, reluctant growl from his stomach. The kind a kid tries to hide by pressing his arms tighter against his body. She pretended she didn't hear it. Sometimes, dignity matters more than food. She would feed him when they got home. "We are going to my place," she said. "I have a son about your age. You can get warm, eat something, and we will figure out the next step." "Okay, okay," barely a whisper. They drove in silence for another 2 minutes. Then the boy spoke, not to Betty, more to himself, more to the window. "Your car makes a weird noise." Betty almost laughed. "Yeah," she said. "That is just her singing. She is old, but she is loyal." Something shifted in the rearview mirror. Not a smile, not quite, but the tension in his shoulders dropped just a fraction. "My dad would never drive a car like this," the boy said quietly. "Well," Betty said, "my car would not drive without me. So we are even." She caught something in the mirror. The boy looked down at his wrist. A smartwatch. Sleek, dark, expensive. The kind that tracks your location, counts your steps, sends alerts to whoever set it up. The kind a wealthy parent puts on their child so they always know where they are. The screen was black. He had turned it off. Not accidentally. Not because the battery died. Betty could see the deliberate way he had pressed the button and held it until the light went out. He had made sure no one could find him through that watch. This child had not wandered away from home. He had not gotten lost. He had not missed his bus. He had run, on purpose, and he had covered his tracks. Betty gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, because she understood something in that moment that changed the weight of everything. Whatever this boy was running from, it was not a stranger. It was not the dark. It was not the rain. It was something inside his own home. Something that hurt enough to make a 9-year-old stand alone at a bus stop at 11 o'clock at night and prefer the storm to going back. Stay with me, because Betty does not know who this boy is yet. She does not know what he is running from. But she is about to find out. And when she does, everything about this night will change. Betty's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up on Fulton Street. No elevator, no doorman, no lobby. just a narrow staircase that smelled like pine sol and someone's dinner from 2 floors down. She carried her bag in one hand and kept the other near the boy's shoulder. Not touching him, just close enough so he knew she was there. He climbed the stairs slowly, like someone who had run out of everything. Energy, courage, whatever had been holding him together on that bus stop bench. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, though, calling the second one a bedroom was generous. It was more like a closet with a window. The living room and kitchen shared the same space, separated by a counter with 2 stools. The walls were clean. The floor was swept. There were drawings on the refrigerator, held up by magnets shaped like letters of the alphabet. A stack of library books sat on the coffee table next to a bowl of plastic fruit that Jalen had won at a school fair. It was not a rich home, but it was a loved home. You could feel it the moment you walked in. Jalen was asleep on the couch, curled up in his pajamas with a blanket pulled to his chin and 1 sock on and 1 sock off. Mrs. Thelma had left a note on the counter. Fed him dinner. Bath done. He wanted to wait up for you. Made it to 9:30. Good night, dear. Betty smiled. She always smiled when she saw her son sleeping. It was the only time of day when she could look at him without worrying about whether she was doing enough. She turned to the boy. He was standing in the doorway, not moving, just staring at the apartment like he had never seen anything like it before. And maybe he had not because it was beautiful or impressive, but because it was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat. You can sit down, Betty said. I am going to heat up some food. You like mac and cheese, he nodded, still holding his backpack. Betty moved to the kitchen, pulled a container out of the refrigerator. Homemade mac and cheese from 2 nights ago. Baked, not the box kind. Lorraine's recipe. 3 cheeses, breadcrumb top, a little mustard in the sauce. She scooped a portion onto a plate, added a piece of leftover roasted chicken, and put it in the microwave. The boy sat at the counter. He set his backpack on the floor beside him but kept 1 strap looped around his ankle, like he might need to grab it and run again at any second. The microwave beeped. Betty set the plate in front of him with a fork and a glass of water. He looked at the food. Then he looked at Betty, then back at the food. He picked up the fork and took a small bite. Then another. Then another. Not fast, not like a kid who was starving. Slow, careful, like he was tasting something unfamiliar. This is really good, he said. It is just leftovers, Betty said. The boy was quiet for a moment. Then, at my house, nobody cooks. Everything comes in containers from restaurants. My dad orders from this place that delivers in silver trays, but nobody actually makes anything. Betty did not say anything to that. She just let it sit in the air between them. Some things do not need a response. They just need a witness. A small voice came from the couch. Mama Jalen was sitting up, eyes half open, looking at the boy at the counter with the pure, unfiltered curiosity that only a 7-year-old can produce. Hey, baby, Betty said. Go back to sleep. But Jalen was already off the couch, already walking over, already looking at this stranger in his kitchen with 0 fear and total interest. Who is that? He is a friend, Betty said. He is staying with us tonight. Jalen looked at the boy. The boy looked at Jalen. You want to see my dinosaurs? Jalen asked. And just like that, the wall came down. Not all of it, but enough. The boy slid off the stool and followed Jalen to the bedroom. Betty heard them talking in low voices, heard Jalen explaining which dinosaur was which, heard the boy say, I like the T-Rex. Heard Jalen say, yeah, everybody likes the T-Rex, but the Triceratops is actually stronger. 10 minutes. Betty gave them 10 minutes of being kids before she stepped into the doorway and said it was time to sleep. Jalen climbed into the top bunk. The boy stood there looking at the bottom bunk, then at Jalen, above him, then at Betty. He is lucky, the boy said quietly. Betty tilted her head. Why do you say that? Because you are here. 5 words. 5 simple words that opened a door into this boy's world wider than anything he had said all night. Because you are here. Not because you are rich. Not because you have a big house. Not because you have nice things. Because you are here, present, in the room, at the end of the day, waiting. Betty felt something tighten in her chest. She knelt down and pulled the blanket up to his chin the way she did for Jalen every night. "You are safe here," she said. "Get some sleep." He closed his eyes. And within minutes, he was out. Deeply, completely asleep. The kind of sleep that comes when your body finally trusts the place it is in. Betty walked back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked. The battery was at 11%. She typed into the search bar, "Missing child report Brooklyn. Missing boy 9 years old." Then she plugged in her charger and waited for results to load on her slow connection. She was not hiding this child. She was not keeping him. She was doing exactly what any responsible person should do. She was making sure he was safe while she figured out where he belonged. But somewhere deep in her gut, in that place where mothers carry their knowing, Betty sensed that where this boy belonged and where this boy had come from were not the same place. Before we continue with Betty's story, there is something important you need to understand about children who run away from home, because what happened to the boy in Betty's apartment that night is not as rare as you might think. Every year in the United States, hundreds of thousands of children leave home without permission. The numbers are staggering. But here is the part most people get wrong. When we picture a runaway child, we picture poverty. We picture abuse. We picture broken homes in broken neighborhoods. And sometimes that is true, but not always. Not even most of the time. Research in child psychology has identified something called emotional neglect. It is different from abuse. There are no bruises, no yelling, no locked doors. Emotional neglect is the absence of something rather than the presence of something harmful. It is a parent who provides everything except attention, a home that has every comfort except connection, a child who is fed, clothed, sheltered, and completely invisible. Children who experience emotional neglect often do not act out. They do the opposite. They go quiet. They stop sharing. They perform well in school because achievement is the only way to get noticed. They learn to need less, to ask for less, to take up as little emotional space as possible. And from the outside, they look fine. They look perfect, actually, which is why nobody notices until something breaks. The signs are subtle. A child who turns off their phone. A child who seeks warmth from strangers because the warmth at home has gone cold. A child who runs not because they are being hurt, but because they have stopped being seen. If you are already invested in this story, you are going to want to stay until the end. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you do not miss what happens next. Because the boy sleeping on Betty's couch had everything money could buy: a mansion, a private school, a closet full of clothes, a smartwatch on his wrist that cost more than Betty earned in a month. But what he did not have was someone who noticed when he was hurting, someone who sat with him at dinner, someone who asked about his day and actually waited for the answer, someone who was simply consistently, reliably there. That is not a poverty problem. That is a presence problem, and it crosses every income bracket, every zip code, every background. Now, let us talk about the man who was supposed to be there. Graham Whitmore did not grow up with money. That is the first thing you need to know about him, because everything he did, every decision he made, every mistake that led to this night started with that fact. He grew up in West Baltimore, a neighborhood where the streetlights did not always work and the sirens were so constant that after a while they became background music. His mother Diane was a nurse. She worked 3 shifts, days, evenings, weekends. Whatever the hospital needed, she gave. She raised Graham and his younger sister alone because their father had left when Graham was 6. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just an empty closet and a silence that settled into the house like dust. Graham remembered the day he realized his father was not coming back. He was sitting on the front steps waiting. His mother came out, sat beside him and said, "He is not coming, baby. And I know that hurts, but I need you to hear me. You are not what he left. You are what I stayed for." Diane Whitmore worked herself to exhaustion for 23 years. She put Graham through public school, then community college, then watched him transfer to a state university on a scholarship he earned by studying until his eyes burned. She died of a heart attack when Graham was 31, before she saw him become what he became. Graham built his company Whitmore Logistics Solutions from a laptop in his studio apartment. He started by solving supply chain problems for small businesses, then medium ones, then corporations, then governments. By the time he was 40, his company was worth $2 billion. By 45, $4.7 billion. His face was on magazine covers. His name was in articles next to words like visionary and self-made and relentless. And he was relentless. That was true. He worked 18-hour days. He took calls at midnight. He flew to Singapore on Tuesday, and Tokyo on Thursday, and London on Saturday. He built something extraordinary, and he lost himself inside it. His wife Denise had been the counterweight. She was the one who made sure the house felt like a home. She was the one who read to Nolan every night, who picked him up from school herself even though they had a driver, who sat on the kitchen floor and built Lego sets for hours because Nolan loved them and Denise loved Nolan, and that was enough reason to sit on a hard floor until her back ached. Denise got sick when Nolan was 5. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3 by the time they caught it. She fought for 14 months with a ferocity that the doctors said they had never seen. She fought through surgeries, through chemotherapy that took her hair and her appetite and her energy, but never her smile. She fought because Nolan was 5 and she was not ready to leave him yet. She died on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Nolan was in the next room. Graham was on a conference call. He ended the call 17 minutes too late. He never forgave himself for those 17 minutes. And instead of facing the grief, instead of sitting with the unbearable weight of losing the woman who held his world together, Graham did what he had always done when life hurt too much. He worked harder, longer, more obsessively than ever, because work was the only place where the pain could not find him. Nolan went from having a mother who was always there to having a father who was almost never there. The transition happened gradually, then all at once. First, it was one missed dinner, then 2, then a week. Then the dinners stopped being expected at all. Graham hired nannies, good ones, expensive ones, women with degrees in early childhood education and references from other wealthy families. But nannies are not parents. They are employees. They have shifts. They clock in and they clock out. And no matter how kind they are, a child knows the difference between someone who is paid to care and someone who cares because they cannot help it. The latest nanny was Vivian, professional, organized, cold in the way that efficient people sometimes are. She kept Nolan on schedule, fed him on time, made sure his homework was done. But she did not ask him how he felt. She did not notice that he had stopped drawing, stopped talking about school, stopped laughing at the television shows he used to love. Nolan was disappearing inside his own house, inch by inch, day by day, becoming quieter, smaller, more invisible, and nobody noticed, because the grades were still good, because the behavior was still fine, because the house was still standing and the money was still flowing and everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look from the outside. Until tonight, until 10:14 in the evening when Graham's phone rang and Vivian's voice came through flat and clinical. Mr. Whitmore Nolan is not in his room. I have checked the house. He is not here. I believe he may have left. Graham was sitting in his office on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown. He had been reviewing acquisition documents for a company in Singapore, a deal worth $800 million, a deal that would have expanded his empire into Southeast Asia. He dropped the phone, picked it up, dropped it again. His hands were shaking. Graham Whitmore, a man who had negotiated with governments and stared down boardrooms full of hostile investors, could not hold his phone steady. What do you mean he left? Where would he go? I do not know, sir. He did not say anything to me. When was the last time you saw him? Around 7. He was in his room. He said he was not hungry. Graham's mind went to every dark place a parent's mind can go. Kidnapping, trafficking, accident. The city was full of dangers, and his son was 9 years old and out there somewhere in the rain. He called the police, then his head of security, then a private investigator he kept on retainer for corporate matters, then the school, then Nolan's classmates. He called everyone he could think of. He mobilized a search team that most people could not afford in a lifetime. 60 people, security personnel, drivers, investigators, all of them fanning out across Manhattan and Brooklyn within the hour. And as Graham sat in the back of his car being driven through streets he normally never saw at this hour, a question landed in his chest like a stone. The police had asked it first. Has anything happened recently that might have caused your son to leave? Is there anything he was upset about? Graham could not answer. Not because the answer was complicated, but because he did not know. He did not know what his son was upset about. He did not know what his son felt about anything. He knew Nolan's school schedule. He knew his shoe size. He knew his tutor's name and his dentist's number and the password to his tablet, but he did not know his son. He did not know his favorite song. Did not know what he dreamed about. Did not know the name of his best friend. Did not know whether Nolan missed his mother every day or only sometimes or every single minute of every single hour the way Graham did, but refused to admit. He knew the area codes of 20 investors in 12 countries. He could not name one thing that made his son laugh. Then Vivian called again, and this time her voice carried something it had not carried before. Hesitation. Mr. Whitmore, there is something I should tell you. This afternoon Nolan was outside your home office. I believe he overheard your phone call with the attorney, the one about the boarding school in Connecticut. Graham went cold. The Hawthorne Academy. He had been discussing it with his lawyer for 2 weeks. A prestigious boarding school with a structured program for gifted children. The kind of place that looked extraordinary on paper. Small class sizes, world-class faculty, rolling green campus, far from the noise of the city. Graham had told himself it was for Nolan's benefit. A stable environment, routine, structure, things a boy needed that Graham could not provide because he was never home. But the truth, the one Graham had buried under layers of logic and justification, was simpler and uglier. He wanted Nolan somewhere else. Not because Nolan needed to go, but because every time Graham looked at his son he saw Denise, and the pain of that was more than he knew how to carry. He was doing exactly what his own father had done, sending his child away, dressed in different clothes, wrapped in different language, but the same act, the same abandonment, the same choice to protect himself from pain at the cost of his son's presence. Nolan had heard the phone call, had heard his father discuss shipping him to Connecticut the way you discuss shipping a package, had heard the words stable environment and focus on the expansion and he will adjust. And Nolan had made his own decision. He was not going to wait to be sent away. He was going to leave first, on his own terms. Graham sat in the back of his car, rain streaking the windows, 60 people searching for his son, and the terrible crushing realization settling into his bones that his boy had not been taken. His boy had run from him. Graham Whitmore had 60 employees searching the city. He had police, he had investigators, he had money and power and resources that most people could not imagine. But it was a single mother with a broken minivan and a plate of leftover mac and cheese who had already found his son. And what happens when those two worlds collide is going to change everything. Now, let me take you back to that afternoon, back to the moment that broke everything open. It was 4:17 in the afternoon. Nolan Whitmore was sitting on the floor in the hallway outside his father's home office. The door was closed. It was always closed. The office was on the second floor of their house in Greenwich Village, a brownstone that had been renovated to look like something out of a design magazine. Clean lines, cold surfaces, beautiful in the way that museums are beautiful, not in the way that homes are. Nolan was holding a piece of paper, a drawing he had made that afternoon. He had spent 2 hours on it. Colored pencils, careful lines. He was good at drawing. His mother had told him that. She used to tape his pictures to the refrigerator, but after she died, the housekeeper had taken them all down during a deep cleaning, and nobody had put them back. The drawing showed 2 people standing on a dock. One big, one small, each holding a fishing rod. The water was blue. The sky was orange. There was a boat in the background and a fish on the small one's line. It was a memory. The last time Nolan and his father had done something together. Just the two of them. A Saturday morning 2 years ago. They had driven to a lake in Connecticut. Graham had rented a small boat. They had spent 4 hours on the water. Nolan caught 3 fish. Graham caught nothing and pretended to be jealous. They ate sandwiches on the dock. Graham's phone had been in the car the whole time. That was the best day of Nolan's life. He had been 7. He was 9 now, and 2 years felt like 20. Nolan had made the drawing because he wanted to show it to his father. He wanted to say, "Remember this. Can we go again? Can we have another day like that? Just one more." He had been waiting outside the office for 40 minutes. He could hear his father's voice through the door. On a call. Always on a call. Then he heard his name. Nolan will adjust. Kids are resilient. The Hawthorne Academy in Connecticut has the best program for his age group. Structured environment, small class sizes, year-round supervision. It is exactly what he needs right now. Nolan pressed closer to the door. His heart was beating fast, but he did not move. He did not breathe. "I just need him somewhere stable while I handle the Singapore expansion. 3 months, maybe 6, maybe the full year. We will see how it goes. But he will be fine. He is a strong kid." Nolan did not know what Hawthorne Academy was. He did not know what boarding school meant exactly. But he understood the words somewhere, and while I handle, and he will be fine, he understood the tone. It was the same tone his father used when talking about moving inventory or rerouting shipments. Practical, efficient, solved. His father was sending him away. Not to a lake, not on a trip they would take together. Away. To a school in another state, so that Graham could focus on work without the inconvenience of having a son in the house. Nolan sat on that hallway floor and felt something collapse inside his chest. Not loud, not dramatic. A quiet caving in, like a sand castle dissolving from the inside when the tide reaches it. He thought about his mother. He thought about what she used to say when she tucked him in at night. "Your dad loves you, Nolan. He just does not always know how to show it. He is trying. Give him time." Nolan had given him time. 4 years of time. 4 years of eating dinner alone. 4 years of birthdays where the presents arrived but the person did not. 4 years of waiting outside office doors and hearing his father talk about everything in the world except him. Maybe Mom was wrong, Nolan thought. Maybe he does not love me at all. Maybe I am just in the way. 7 words. 7 words that no 9-year-old should ever have to think. 7 words that carried the weight of every missed dinner, every empty seat at every school play every night. Nolan fell asleep alone in a house that was worth $12 million and felt like a prison. He looked at the drawing in his hands. The dock, the fishing rods, the orange sky, the 2 figures, one big and one small, standing close enough to touch. He walked to the office door and placed the drawing on the floor, face down, so his father would not see what it was unless he picked it up, unless he cared enough to turn it over. Then Nolan went to his room. He pulled his backpack from the closet, put in a sweatshirt, 2 protein bars from the kitchen, his stuffed bear, the one his mother had given him on his 5th birthday, the last birthday she was alive for. He looked at his smartwatch, the one his father's assistant had set up with GPS tracking, the one that sent his location to an app on his father's phone every 15 minutes. He pressed the side button, held it for 3 seconds. The screen went dark. Nolan did not have a plan. He did not know where he was going. He just knew he was not going to sit in this house and wait to be shipped to Connecticut like a piece of furniture nobody wanted anymore. He climbed out the back door. He walked for 2 hours. Through streets he did not recognize, past stores that were closing, past people who did not see him. A 9-year-old boy walking alone through Brooklyn in the dark, invisible, just like he was at home. He ended up at a bus stop, not because he planned to take a bus, but because his legs gave out and the bench was there and he had nowhere else to go. He sat down, then stood up, then sat down again. The rain started. He did not move. He did not care. The rain was honest. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. It was cold and wet, and it did not lie. He stood there until the headlights appeared, until the strange noise of a struggling engine filled the silence, until a woman's voice came through a rolled-down window, warm and steady and real. And for the first time in hours, Nolan felt something other than empty. After Nolan fell asleep on her couch, Betty sat at the kitchen table and tried to do the right thing. She picked up her phone and called the police non-emergency line. The recording told her the estimated wait time was 45 minutes. She waited. At the 20-minute mark, she was transferred. Then transferred again. Then put on hold again. At 12:47 in the morning, a dispatcher finally answered. Betty explained the situation. She had found a child alone at a bus stop. She had brought him home. He was safe. He was sleeping. She did not know his name or where he lived. She needed someone to come help figure out where he belonged. The dispatcher took her information. Address, phone number, description of the boy. If the child is safe and not in any distress, a patrol unit will be dispatched in the morning, the dispatcher said. We are backed up tonight. Multiple incidents. Is the child in any immediate danger? No, Betty said. He is sleeping. He is safe. Then we will send someone first thing. Please keep him with you until then. Thank you for calling. The line went dead. Betty stared at her phone. She had done what she was supposed to do. She had called. She had reported. She had a case number scrawled on a napkin. Whatever happened next, she had done the right thing. She plugged her phone into the charger and sat in the quiet of her apartment. The boy was asleep on the couch, one arm tucked under the pillow, the other wrapped around his backpack, which had come partially unzipped during the night. Betty could see what was inside. A sweatshirt, 2 protein bars, one partially eaten, and a stuffed bear, brown, worn soft from years of holding. One ear, slightly darker than the other, from being rubbed between small fingers. This was not the backpack of a child running away to cause trouble. This was the backpack of a child running toward comfort, toward whatever safety he could carry with him. Betty reached over and gently pulled the blanket higher over his shoulders. She did not touch him. She just made sure he was covered, made sure he was warm, the way she did for Jalen every night, the way her mother used to do for her. At 2:11 in the morning, the boy screamed. Not a word, just a sound, sharp, frightened, the kind of sound that tears through sleep and fills a room with panic. Betty was beside him in seconds. He was sitting up, eyes wide, breathing fast. His hands were gripping the stuffed bear so hard his knuckles had gone white. Hey, you are okay. You are safe. I am right here. She said it the way she said it to Jalen during thunderstorms. Calm, steady, present, not asking what happened, not demanding an explanation, just being there. Just being a voice in the dark that says you are not alone. The boy looked at her. His eyes were wet. His lip was trembling. And then the wall broke. He cried. Not quietly, not politely. He cried the way a child cries when they have been holding it in for so long that the release comes out in waves. Great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. The kind of crying that sounds like grief and relief at the same time. Betty did not hug him. She did not grab him. She sat on the edge of the couch and placed her hand on the cushion next to his leg, close enough that he could reach for her if he wanted, far enough that he did not feel trapped. He reached. He grabbed her hand and held it. And he cried for 7 minutes straight. When it slowed, when the sobs turned to shudders and the shudders turned to silence, he spoke. My mom used to say that. You are safe. She said it every night. Betty felt something crack open behind her ribs. Then your mama and I have something in common, she said quietly. She died 4 years ago. I am sorry, baby. I am so sorry. My dad hired a new nanny. She does not say it. She does not say anything. She just checks on me and closes the door. And your dad, he is never home. He works all the time, and now he wants to send me to a school far away. I heard him on the phone. He told someone I would adjust, that I would be fine. The boy looked at his bear, rubbed the dark ear between his fingers. I am not fine. I just do not know how to tell him. And even if I did, I do not think he would hear me. Betty sat with that. She did not try to fix it. She did not offer solutions or reassurances or explanations for why his father acted the way he did. She just sat in the truth of what this boy had said and let it exist in the room without judgment. Some children need answers. Some children need advice. But most children, the ones who are really hurting, just need someone to sit with them in the dark and not try to turn the light on too fast. Betty was good at that. She had learned it from her mother. She had practiced it at Jefferson Elementary. And she did it now at 2 in the morning for a boy whose name she still did not know in an apartment that could fit inside his living room. "Get some rest," she said. "We will figure everything out in the morning. But tonight you are safe, and I am not going anywhere." He lay back down, pulled the bear to his chest, closed his eyes. And this time, when sleep came, it was quiet. No screams, no thrashing, just the deep, trusting sleep of a child who finally felt held. Betty went back to the kitchen table. She did not sleep. She sat in the dark and thought about what that boy had said. "I do not think he would hear me." And she wondered how many children in this city, in this country, were saying the same thing right now. Not because their parents were cruel, but because their parents were absent, busy, distracted, drowning in their own lives while their children slowly disappeared. At 5:14 in the morning, something woke Betty up. Not a sound from inside, a sound from outside. Car doors, multiple car doors, then voices, then footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, fast, the kind of footsteps that do not belong in a walk-up apartment building at 5 in the morning. Then the knock. Not a normal knock. The kind of knock that rattles the door in its frame. The kind that says, "I am not asking permission. I am announcing my arrival." Betty stood up, smoothed her sleep shirt, checked on the boys. Jalen still asleep in the bedroom. Nolan still on the couch, stirring now from the noise, but not yet awake. She walked to the door, looked through the peephole. A man, tall, late 40s. Expensive coat wrinkled like he had been wearing it all night. Behind him, 2 uniformed police officers and 3 men in dark suits who looked like private security. Betty took a breath, undid the chain, turned the lock, opened the door. The man's eyes were red. His face was drawn tight. He looked like a person who had aged 10 years in one night. "Where is my son?" he said. No hello, no introduction. Just 4 words pushed through clenched teeth. Betty did not step back. She did not flinch. She stood in her doorway in her old sleep shirt, and her hair pulled up in a bun, and her bare feet on the cold floor, and she looked this man directly in the eyes. "He is sleeping on my couch. He is safe. He has been safe all night. I called the police at 12:45 to report that I had found him. I have a case number. Would you like to see it?" Graham Whitmore blinked. He had been expecting fear. He had been expecting a locked door, a confrontation, a denial. He had been preparing himself for the worst. Kidnapping, ransom, some kind of scheme. He had not been preparing for a calm woman in pajamas telling him she had already called the authorities. "You took my son," Graham said. His voice was shaking but trying to sound controlled. "No, sir," Betty said, and her voice was the opposite of his, steady, clear, unafraid. "I found your son, standing by himself at a bus stop on Atlantic Avenue at 11 o'clock at night, in the rain, with no phone turned on, no adult in sight, and no way to get home. And I would like to know why a 9-year-old boy was standing out there alone." Graham opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He was not used to being questioned. He was used to giving orders, used to rooms that went quiet when he spoke, used to people saying, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, sir," and "Right away, sir." But this woman was not his employee. She was not his assistant. She was not someone who needed anything from him. She was a mother who had found a child in the dark and brought him home and fed him and kept him safe. And she was not going to apologize for it. One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to verify the child's safety and identity." "May we come in?" "Yes," Betty said. "Of course." They entered. The apartment was small. The officer looked around, took notes, checked the couch where Nolan had been sleeping. The blanket was pushed aside. The backpack was on the floor. The stuffed bear was on the pillow. Because Nolan was no longer on the couch, He was standing in the doorway to the bedroom. Small, barefoot, his hair pressed flat on one side from sleep. His eyes were locked on his father. Graham saw him, and something dissolved in his face. The anger, the fear, the control. All of it fell away, and what was left was just a father looking at his son, wanting to run to him, wanting to grab him and hold him and never let go. But Nolan did not move toward him. He did not run. He did not smile. He stood perfectly still and said 6 words that cut through every layer of wealth and power and authority that Graham Whitmore had ever built around himself. I am not going to that school. Graham stopped. The officers stopped. The security team in the hallway stopped. I heard you on the phone, Nolan said. His voice was small, but it did not waver. You want to send me away. Like I am something you need to store somewhere while you work, Nolan Graham said. His voice cracked. I am not going. The room held its breath. What Nolan said next made Graham Whitmore, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals, without flinching, a man who had stared down boardrooms and governments and hostile investors, sit down on a stranger's kitchen chair and break. You were not going to send me to school, Dad. You were going to send me away. Nolan's voice was not loud. That was what made it devastating. A child screaming can be dismissed. A child throwing a tantrum can be waited out. But a child speaking calmly with the precision of someone who has rehearsed the words 1,000 times inside their own head that cannot be ignored, that cuts through everything. You send away everything that reminds you of Mom. You sold her car, the blue one, the one she used to pick me up from school in. You told somebody to come take it, and the next day it was gone, and you never even told me. Graham did not move. He stood in the middle of Betty's kitchen, a billionaire in a wrinkled coat, and he did not move. You turned her office into a gym. She had her books in there, her pictures, that lamp she liked, all of it, gone, like she was never there. Nolan's eyes were dry. That was the part that broke something in Betty's chest. The boy was not crying. He had moved past crying. He was in that place beyond tears where children go when they have carried something too heavy for too long, and the weight has flattened the emotion into something harder, something sharper, something that sounds like facts. You told Vivian to put the photos away, the ones on the hallway wall, Mom and me at the beach, Mom and you at that restaurant, the one where she is laughing. You told Vivian they were cluttering the hallway. But they were not clutter, Dad. They were her. They were the only way I could still see her face every day. And you took them down. Graham's jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. His eyes were filling, but he would not blink. He would not let them fall. Not yet. And now you want to send me to Connecticut, to some school I have never heard of, where I do not know anyone, where nobody knows me. So you do not have to look at me either, because I look like her. Everybody says so. I have her eyes. I have her smile. And every time you look at me, you see her. And it hurts you. I know it does. I am not stupid. I am 9, but I am not stupid. Betty quietly moved toward the bedroom. She took Jalen by the hand. He was awake, watching with wide eyes. She brought him to the bedroom and closed the door gently. This was not her moment. This was theirs. Through the thin wall, she could hear Nolan still talking. I thought if I was really good, if I got good grades, and did not cause trouble, and did not ask for anything, you would want to keep me. I thought if I was easy enough, you would stay. But you were going to send me away anyway. So maybe it does not matter how good I am. Maybe I am just in the way. The kitchen went silent. Then Betty heard the sound, a chair being pulled across the floor, the creak of old wood under heavy weight, and a sound she had never expected to hear from the man who had pounded on her door like he owned the world. Graham Whitmore was crying, not politely, not quietly. The deep, wrecked sobbing of a man whose son had just held up a mirror and shown him everything he had spent 4 years refusing to see. He was sitting on Betty's kitchen chair, the one with the wobble, the one she kept meaning to fix, and he was falling apart on it. I am sorry, Graham said. His voice was broken glass. I am so sorry, Nolan. I did not know. I did not see what I was doing. Nolan stood still for a long moment. Then he walked to his father. Not fast, not slow. He stood in front of him and looked at him the way children look at adults when they are deciding whether to believe them. "I do not want sorry," Nolan said. "I want you to be home." 8 words. The simplest sentence a child can say. And the hardest thing Graham Whitmore had ever been asked to do. Not build a company. Not close a deal. Not solve a problem with money or power or strategy. Just be home. Just be there. Just show up. Graham pulled his son into his arms. Nolan let him. And they held each other in a stranger's kitchen on a wobbly chair while the morning light came through a window that needed cleaning and the coffee maker on the counter blinked 12 o'clock because nobody had ever said it. Betty gave them 20 minutes. She sat with Jalen on his bed and read him a book, the same one they had read 3 times already that week. Because 7-year-olds do not get tired of stories they love. When the sounds from the kitchen shifted from crying to quiet talking, she came back out. Graham was sitting at the table. Nolan was beside him. Their chairs were pulled close. Graham's hand was on his son's back. His eyes were swollen and red, and he looked like a man who had been taken apart and was trying to figure out how to put himself back together. He looked up at Betty. "How did you get him to talk?" Graham asked. His voice was raw. "My son has not talked to anyone like that in years. Not his therapist, not his teachers, not me." "How did you do it?" Betty leaned against the counter. She crossed her arms. "Not in defense, in thought. I did not do anything special," she said. "I just did not leave." Graham stared at her. The words landed somewhere deep. She could see it in his face. The recognition. The shame. The understanding that the one thing his son needed was the one thing he had refused to give. Not a program. Not a specialist. Not a school with rolling green lawns and small class sizes. Just a person who stayed in the room. "How do you do it?" Graham asked. "Raise a boy alone. Work the way you work." And still he looked around the small apartment at the drawings on the refrigerator, at the dinosaurs on the shelf, at the library books, and the plastic fruit, and the warmth that lived in every corner. He clearly loves being here. Betty did not sugarcoat it. "I am not a perfect mother," she said. "Some nights Jalen eats cereal for dinner because I am too tired to cook. Some weeks I cannot afford his field trip, and I have to tell him maybe next time and watch his face try not to show me it hurts. Last month his shoes had holes in them, and I put cardboard inside until payday because that was all I had." She paused. "But I show up. Every night I am in this apartment. Every morning I walk him to school. He knows that no matter how tired I am, no matter how broke I am, no matter how hard the day was, I am not going anywhere. He knows that when he falls asleep, I will be here, and when he wakes up, I will still be here. That is not money. That is not a program. That is just being there." Graham said nothing. He was listening the way people listen when they know they are hearing something that will change them. "I work with kids," Betty continued. "At a school. I am a teacher's aide. I see a lot of children every day, all kinds, rich ones, poor ones in between. And I will tell you something I have learned in 6 years of watching kids. The ones who act out, the ones who get angry, the ones who go quiet and disappear inside themselves, they are not the ones from the poorest homes. They are the ones nobody picks up on time. Nobody asks how their day was. Nobody sits with them at dinner. Your son did not run away from poverty, Mr. Whitmore. He ran away from silence." She looked at him steadily. "My mama used to say you do not walk past a child alone in the dark. I think that is true even when the dark is inside their own house." The room was still. Graham looked at his son. Nolan looked back. And something passed between them that did not need words. An understanding. A beginning. Not a fix. Not a solution. A beginning. Graham stood up. He looked around the apartment one more time. This small, clean, warm place where his son had slept more peacefully than he had in years. Where a woman who made less in a month than Graham spent on a single dinner had done for Nolan what all his money could not. He reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, opened it. Betty saw what he was doing and shook her head. "I did not help your son for money," she said. "I helped him because he was alone, and I am a mother. You do not owe me anything." Graham paused, his hand still on the wallet. He was not used to this. He was used to solving problems with checks, used to people taking what he offered and thanking him for it. The transaction was how he understood the world. Service rendered payment given balance restored. But Betty was not selling anything. She had not performed a service. She had done what her mother taught her to do. And the idea of being paid for it was not insulting. It was just wrong. It would turn something sacred into something transactional. And Betty would not allow that. Graham put the wallet away. "Thank you," he said. And for the first time since he had walked through her door, his voice was not commanding or demanding or shaking with fear. It was simply grateful. "Thank you for finding my son." Nolan stood up. He walked to Betty. And he did something that made every adult in that room go still. He hugged her. Not a quick hug. Not a polite hug. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her and held on like he was saying goodbye to something he had only just found. "Thank you for the mac and cheese," he whispered. Betty put her hand on the back of his head. "Any time, baby. Any time." Jalen appeared in the doorway. He looked at Nolan. "Is he coming back?" Betty smiled. "Maybe someday." They left. Graham and Nolan walked down the stairs and out onto the street where a black SUV was waiting with the security team. Nolan climbed into the back seat. Graham got in beside him. The door closed. As the car pulled away, Graham looked in the rearview mirror. Nolan was staring out the window. In his lap he held the drawing. The one he had made the day before. The dock, the fishing rods, the orange sky. He had taken it from the floor outside Graham's office before he ran. He had carried it in his backpack all night, through the rain, to the bus stop, into a stranger's minivan, into a stranger's home. He had carried it because it was the last piece of evidence that his father had once been there. Graham looked at that drawing and felt the full weight of what he had almost lost. That evening, Graham Whitmore did something he had not done in 3 years. He came home at 6 o'clock. He walked into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. He stared at the contents the way a man stares at a foreign language. He pulled out a box of pasta. Boiled water. Forgot the salt. Overcooked the noodles. Burned the sauce. Set off the smoke detector. Nolan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his father wave a towel at the ceiling to stop the beeping. And for the first time in months, the boy laughed. Not a big laugh, not a performance, a real laugh, small and surprised and honest. They ate the burned pasta at the kitchen table. It was terrible. Neither of them cared. After dinner, Graham picked up the drawing. He looked at it for a long time. Then he walked to the refrigerator, the massive stainless steel thing that had never had anything taped to it in its life, and he stuck the drawing on the door with a magnet he found in a junk drawer. Right next to the report card that his assistant had printed out and left on the counter weeks ago. The one Graham had never looked at. He looked at it now. Before he went to bed, Graham made one phone call. To the attorney handling the Hawthorne enrollment. 4 words. Cancel the application. It was not a transformation. It was not a miracle. It was one evening. One burned dinner. One drawing on a refrigerator. One phone call. But it was a start. And starts are all that matter when you have been standing still for 4 years. 6 months later, the drawing was still on the refrigerator. It had been joined by others. A drawing of a boat. A drawing of 2 people on a dock with a sunset that Nolan had painted in watercolor. A photograph of Nolan holding a fish grinning with Graham beside him looking sunburned and proud. The fishing trips happened every Saturday now. Not because Graham had suddenly become an outdoorsman. He still could not tie a proper knot. Still jumped when a fish flopped too close to his shoes. But he showed up every Saturday, rain or shine. Phone left in the car. He had hired a chief operating officer, a woman named Patricia, who had been his VP for 6 years and was more than capable of running the day-to-day. Graham cut his meeting schedule by 30%. He stopped taking calls after 7 in the evening. He told his board that his son was his priority and that anyone who had a problem with that could find another CEO. They did not. Because the company was worth $4.7 billion, and Graham Whitmore was still the best person to run it. He just did it differently now. Nolan started seeing a therapist, a child psychologist named Dr. Simmons, who specialized in grief and parental attachment. Graham went with him every Thursday, 3:30 in the afternoon. He sat in the waiting room for the first few sessions. Then Dr. Simmons invited him in. "Your son does not need a perfect father," Dr. Simmons told him during one session. "He needs a present one. Perfection is a standard. Presence is a practice. You do not get it right every time. You just keep showing up." Graham did not get it right every time. There were nights he came home late, nights when the old habits pulled at him like gravity. A deal in Singapore that required 3 months on the ground. He almost said yes. He was halfway through drafting the travel schedule when he walked past the refrigerator and saw the drawing, the dock, the fishing rods, the orange sky. He called his COO and told her to handle Singapore. But this story is not just about Graham. Because on the other side of the city in a walk-up apartment in Bed-Stuy, Betty Dawson's life had not changed at all. And it had changed completely. The minivan still shuddered above 50. The sliding door still stuck. She still worked 2 jobs. The check engine light still glowed like a small orange sun on her dashboard. But there was one thing different. Graham had pulled Nolan out of his private school and enrolled him in the public school district where Betty worked. Not the fancy one in Manhattan, the one in Brooklyn, Jefferson Elementary, where the textbooks were old and the heating broke in February, and a teacher's aide named Betty Dawson spent her days helping children learn to read. Graham had not asked Betty's permission. He had not told her in advance. He had simply done it. Because his son had slept better on her couch than he had in his own bed in years. Because something about that apartment, that school, that neighborhood felt more real than anything in Nolan's life. And Graham wanted his son to know what real felt like. Nolan and Jalen became friends. Not the kind of friends who are polite at birthday parties. The kind who build forts out of couch cushions and argue about which dinosaur would win in a fight and share snacks without asking. Nolan taught Jalen chess. Jalen taught Nolan how to shoot a basketball on the cracked court behind the apartment building. Jalen was better. Nolan did not mind. Every Wednesday after school, Nolan came to Betty's apartment. Graham picked him up at 6. Sometimes Graham came inside. Sometimes he sat at Betty's kitchen table and drank coffee from a mug with a chip in the rim and talked to Betty about things he could not talk about with anyone else. About Denise. About grief. About the terror of raising a child alone when you are terrified of getting it wrong. "You are not alone," Betty told him once. "You just forgot how to ask for help." This story is far from over. What happens in the next 2 years will change both families in ways neither of them expected. Stay subscribed. 2 years after that rainy night in November, Graham Whitmore stood in front of a room full of reporters and made an announcement that had nothing to do with logistics, nothing to do with stock prices, and nothing to do with the empire he had spent 20 years building. He was launching a foundation, the Denise Whitmore Foundation, named after his late wife, the woman whose car he had sold, whose office he had gutted, whose photographs he had hidden in a closet because looking at them felt like swallowing glass. He was done hiding from her memory. He was done erasing her. The foundation would honor her by doing what Denise had always believed in, showing up for children who needed someone to show up. The mission was specific. Support for children experiencing grief loss and emotional neglect. After-school programs in 15 school districts across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Free counseling. Mentorship. Community spaces where kids could be kids and where adults were trained to actually see them. Not manage them. Not schedule them. See them. Graham funded it with $40 million of his own money. But the money was not the important part. The important part was who he hired to run the community outreach. Betty Dawson. Not because she had a degree in nonprofit management. She did not. Not because she had experience running large programs. She had never done that either. He hired her because she had something no degree could teach. She understood what it meant to be unseen. She understood what children needed. And she understood that the gap between a struggling family and a stable one was not always money. Sometimes it was just one person who paid attention. Betty's official title was Community Outreach Coordinator. Her job was to connect the Foundation's programs with the neighborhoods that needed them most. To walk into schools and community centers and churches and sit with parents and teachers and say, "Tell me what your kids need," and then actually listen. She was good at it. She was extraordinary at it. Because Betty had spent her entire adult life doing exactly that. Listening, noticing, showing up. For the first time in her life, Betty had one job. One, not two. Not a day shift and a night shift, and a 6-hour gap of exhaustion in between. One job that paid her enough to live. One job that used everything she knew. One job that made her feel like the years she had spent scrubbing pans and wiping tables and mopping floors had not been wasted, but had been training. She got the minivan fixed. New transmission, new wipers, both sides working now. The mechanic told her she should trade it in, get something newer, more reliable. Betty looked at the van, at the dent in the side door, at the cracked taillight she had patched with red tape, and she shook her head. "I am not getting rid of this car," she said. "This car brought me to where I am. I do not throw away what got me here." She moved to a bigger apartment, same neighborhood, same building actually, just 2 floors up, a 2-bedroom with a window in the kitchen and enough space for Jalen to have his own room. He taped his drawings on the wall above his bed. Dinosaurs mostly, but also one of his mom, standing in front of a car, smiling. Mrs. Thelma still lived next door. She still watched Jalen sometimes when Betty had evening events for the Foundation. She still left notes on the counter, still watched her game shows with the volume low. Some things do not need to change. Graham did not give Betty money. That is an important distinction. He did not write her a check. He did not hand her an envelope. He created a system, a foundation with a budget and a staff and a mission that would outlast any single donation. And within that system, he created a role that fit Betty like it had been built around her. Because it had. That is the difference between charity and opportunity. Charity ends when the giver stops giving. Opportunity grows when the receiver starts building. Betty was building every day. In 15 school districts, in dozens of after-school programs, in the faces of children who looked at her and saw someone who understood what it felt like to be small in a world that did not slow down for small people. But the most important thing that happened in those 2 years was not the foundation. It was not the new apartment. It was not the job. It was a conversation Betty had with Nolan on a park bench one Tuesday afternoon. Nolan was 11 now, taller. His voice had started to change, cracking at odd moments in a way that embarrassed him. He wore a hoodie with the sleeves pulled over his hands. His hair was longer. He looked more like Denise every year. And Graham had stopped flinching when he noticed. He had started smiling instead. Nolan was sitting next to Betty on a bench at the park near Jefferson Elementary. Jalen was on the basketball court with 3 other kids from the after-school program. The sound of the ball bouncing on cracked asphalt filled the afternoon air like a heartbeat. "Can I ask you something?" Nolan said. "You can ask me anything." That night, at the bus stop, why did you stop? Everybody else just drove past. I counted. 7 cars went by before yours. Some of them slowed down, but they kept going. Why did you stop? Betty was quiet for a moment. She watched Jalen steal the ball from a kid twice his size and make a layup that was more luck than skill. She smiled. "Because my mama told me something when I was little," she said. "She told me, you do not walk past a child alone in the dark. Not ever. Not for any reason." She turned to look at Nolan. "And because if my son was standing at a bus stop at 11 o'clock at night in the rain, I would want somebody to stop for him. I would want somebody to bring him inside and feed him and keep him warm and not ask for anything in return. I would want somebody to be the kind of person my mama raised me to be." Nolan nodded slowly. He was quiet for a while. Then he said something that Betty would carry with her for the rest of her life. "I think my mom sent you." Betty looked at him. At this boy who had stood in the rain 2 years ago with a backpack full of protein bars and a stuffed bear and a broken heart. This boy who had said, "Maybe I am just in the way." This boy who had eaten leftover mac and cheese in her kitchen and told her that her son was lucky because she was there. "Maybe she did," Betty said softly. "Maybe she did." They sat in the quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the trees. The basketball bounced. A car passed on the street with its radio playing something slow and distant. Then Jalen's voice cut through the afternoon like a bell. "Mom, Nolan, come play." Nolan grinned. He pulled his sleeves down, jumped off the bench, and ran toward the court. Jalen tossed him the ball. Nolan missed the catch. Jalen laughed. 2 other kids from the program ran over. A girl named Sophia. A boy named Thomas. Different schools. Different neighborhoods. Different everything. Same court. Same game. Same Tuesday afternoon. Betty sat on the bench a moment longer. She looked up at the sky. Clear. Blue. The kind of sky that makes you believe the world might be okay after all. She thought about her mother. About Lorraine Dawson, who had worked 3 shifts and never complained. Who had raised her daughter to see people. To really see them. Who had died before she could see what her teaching would become. "I hope I did you proud, Mama," Betty whispered. Then she stood up. Walked to the court. Jalen passed her the ball. She took a shot. Missed by a mile. Everyone laughed. Betty laughed hardest. And for a moment, standing on that cracked court, surrounded by children who had been seen and heard and held, Betty Dawson felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Whole. You do not walk past a child alone in the dark. Not ever. Not for any reason. Not when the dark is outside. Not when the dark is inside. Not when the child is poor. Not when the child is rich. Not when you are tired. Not when you are broke. Not when the world tells you it is not your problem. You stop. You open the door. You say, "Get in." And sometimes that is all it takes to change everything. Thank you for following Betty and Nolan's journey. Before you go, I want to step outside the story for a moment and talk to you directly. This story is fictional. Betty and Graham and Nolan and Jalen are not real people. But the issues this story explores are very real. Emotional neglect affects hundreds of thousands of children every year across every income level. It is not about money. It is about presence. If you or someone you know is struggling, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-422-4453. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I wrote this story because I believe we live in a world that measures people by their job title, their bank account, their zip code, and we forget that the most powerful thing a human being can do has nothing to do with any of that. The most powerful thing you can do is show up. Betty did not have money. She did not have connections. She did not have a plan. She had a broken minivan and a mother's instinct and a lesson her mama taught her a long time ago, and that was enough. If this story made you think about someone in your life, a child who needs to be seen, a parent who needs to be heard, or maybe even yourself, I hope you take that feeling and do something with it. Call someone. Sit with someone. Show up for someone. You do not need to be rich to change a life. You just need to be there. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind you of the good in people. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave a comment telling me what is the most important thing your mother or someone who loved you, like a mother, ever taught you. I will be reading every single one. Until next time, stay kind, stay present, and never drive past a child in the dark.